The stable was eerily silent, save for the faint rustling of hay under the soft morning breeze. Dust hung in the beams of sunlight streaming through the gaps in the old wooden walls, highlighting a space that had seen better days. At the far end, in a stall tucked away from the rest, stood Shadow, a once proud black stallion. His coat, once gleaming like polished obsidian, had lost its luster, and his ribs showed faintly beneath his skin. Shadow wasn't like the other horses on the ranch. He had been the ranch's star, a legend in the county for his speed and grace. But that was before the accident, before the darkness that stole his vision and left him in a world of shadows. Since then, Shadow had retreated into himself, refusing to eat or drink, barely moving except to shift his weight from one hoof to the other. It was as if the life had drained out of him, leaving only a hollow shell. For Mr. Carter, the ranch's owner, it was a heartbreaking sight. He had raised Shadow from a foal, trained him, raced him, and proudly paraded him at fairs. But now, after weeks of watching the horse waste away, he began to have serious doubts. "If he doesn't come around soon," he murmured one evening, his voice heavy with regret, "we'll have no choice but to let him go. He's suffering." Unbeknownst to him, Lily, an 8-year-old girl with wide, curious eyes, overheard the conversation from her spot near the kitchen door. She'd only been living on the ranch for a few weeks, since her family had moved to help Mr. Carter manage things, but she had already grown attached to the animals, especially Shadow. There was something about him that drew her in, even though he never seemed to notice her visits. Her parents told her to stay away from the stallion. "He's too unpredictable," her mother warned. "He's not himself anymore." But Lily didn't believe that. Deep down, she felt that Shadow wasn't just a blind horse. He was lonely, scared, and maybe even sad. And she couldn't bear the thought of him being sent away, or worse. That night, as the house grew quiet and the grown-ups turned in for the evening, Lily sat cross-legged on her bed, staring at the ceiling. The weight of what she'd overheard pressed down on her chest. She clutched her favorite stuffed bunny, her mind racing. "There has to be something I can do," she whispered to herself. She thought about how Shadow used to be, imagining him galloping across the open fields, his mane streaming like a banner in the wind. Her grandmother used to say that animals could feel love, that sometimes all they needed was someone to believe in them. And in that moment, Lily made a decision. Pulling her little sketchbook from her nightstand, she began scribbling ideas furiously. She didn't know much about horses, but she knew she couldn't let Shadow give up. Somewhere in her imagination, she hoped she'd find a way to bring him back to life. What no one knew, what even Lily didn't fully understand yet, was that her determination would set into motion a chain of events that would change everything. The next morning, Lily was up before the sun. She tiptoed down the creaky stairs of the old ranch house, careful not to wake her parents. Outside, the air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of dew and hay. Pulling her jacket tighter around her, Lily made her way to the stable with her sketchbook tucked under her arm. The barn was quiet, save for the occasional soft whicker of the other horses. But Shadow's stall was different, silent, still. Lily peeked inside and found him exactly where he always was, standing motionless in the corner, his head hanging low. His once proud posture was gone, replaced by the slump of defeat. "Hi, Shadow," Lily whispered, leaning over the stall door. Her small voice carried a gentleness that seemed to ripple through the quiet space. "I don't know if you can hear me, but I'm going to help you. I promise." She slipped into the stall, clutching a handful of carrots she'd grabbed from the kitchen. Shadow didn't move, not even a flick of his ears. Lily knelt down, placing the carrots in front of him, hoping the sweet smell might tempt him. But Shadow didn't so much as sniff them. Lily sat cross-legged on the straw-covered floor, frustration bubbling inside her. "What am I doing wrong?" she muttered. She opened her sketchbook, flipping to the page where she'd drawn a picture of Shadow with little bells tied to the edges of his stall. She had read somewhere that blind animals used sound to navigate, but now that she was here, she realized she had no idea where to start. For the next hour, Lily tried everything she could think of. She hummed softly, hoping her voice might comfort him. She brushed his mane, whispering soothing words. At one point, she even tried leading him toward the carrots by jingling a set of keys she'd borrowed from her dad. But Shadow remained unresponsive, as though he had already given up on life. By the time the sun rose fully, Lily was sitting in the straw, her head resting on her knees. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes. She had been so sure she could reach him, but nothing she did seemed to make a difference. "Lily?" She jumped at the sound of her mother's voice and quickly wiped her eyes. Turning, she saw her mom standing in the barn doorway, arms crossed. "What are you doing in here?" "I was trying to help Shadow," Lily admitted, her voice small. Her mom sighed, stepping closer. "Honey, I know you want to help, but sometimes there's nothing we can do. Shadow's been through a lot. He's not the same horse he used to be." "But he can get better," Lily insisted, her voice trembling with emotion. "He just needs someone to believe in him." Her mum crouched down, placing a hand on Lily's shoulder. "It's not always that simple, sweetheart." Lily nodded, but deep down, she refused to believe it. As her mom guided her out of the barn, Lily glanced back at Shadow one last time. "I won't give up on you," she whispered under her breath. That afternoon, Lily decided to try something different. She remembered her grandmother's old lullaby, a soft, lilting tune that always made her feel safe when she was scared. She grabbed her grandmother's small silver wind chime from the porch, hoping the familiar sound might soothe Shadow. Back in the stable, Lily hung the wind chime just outside Shadow's stall, where it would catch the slightest breeze. She sat cross-legged on the floor again, humming the lullaby softly as the wind chime tinkled. At first, there was no response. Shadow stood as still as ever, his head drooping low. But then something changed. Shadow's ears twitched ever so slightly, tilting toward the sound of the wind chime. Lily held her breath, afraid to move. She kept humming, her voice steady, watching as Shadow lifted his head a fraction. His nostrils flared slightly, as if he were trying to place the sound. Encouraged, Lily jingled the small bell tied to her grandmother's wind chime. Shadow took a hesitant step forward, his hoof crunching softly on the straw. Lily felt her heart leap. "That's it, Shadow," she whispered. "You can do it." For the first time in days, Shadow moved. It wasn't much, just a few slow, cautious steps, but it was enough to fill Lily with hope. The next day, Lily expanded her plan. She found an old set of sleigh bells in the barn, tying them to the edge of Shadow's stall and along the hallway leading to the paddock. She jingled each bell as she placed it, calling Shadow's name softly so he could follow the sound. Shadow was hesitant at first, but as Lily guided him step by step, he began to respond. By the end of the afternoon, he had followed her all the way to the paddock, his ears swiveling to catch every jingle of the bells. Word of Lily's efforts began to spread across the ranch. Mr. Carter watched from a distance, his arms crossed, a skeptical look on his face. "She's a determined one," he muttered to Lily's father. "She gets that from her grandmother," her dad replied with a smile. Over the next week, Shadow's progress was nothing short of miraculous. With Lily's patience and determination, he began to explore the paddock more confidently. She tied bells to the fence posts and scattered them around the open field, creating a sound map for him to follow. Each evening, Lily would sit with Shadow in the barn, humming softly as she brushed his mane. Slowly but surely, he began to regain some of his strength. His ribs were less visible, his coat started to shine again, and he even nickered softly when Lily approached, a sound that filled her with pride. One afternoon, as Lily led Shadow back to the barn, Mr. Carter approached them. He tipped his hat, his expression softer than usual. "You've got a gift, kid," he said gruffly. Lily beamed. "I just believed in him," she said simply. Mr. Carter chuckled. "Sometimes that's all it takes." Despite Shadow's progress, Lily knew there was still a long road ahead. The bells and her voice had become his lifeline, but she wanted him to feel confident enough to navigate on his own. One evening, as she sat brushing Shadow's mane, an idea struck her. She ran to her room, grabbing her sketchbook and pencil. Flipping to a blank page, she began drawing a large paddock filled with familiar landmarks, bales of hay, water troughs, fence posts, all marked by sound cues. "I'll create a world just for you, Shadow," she murmured, her pencil flying across the page. As the stars filled the night sky outside, Lily worked tirelessly on her plan, her heart full of hope. A week after drawing her plans, Lily finally put them into action. With the help of her dad and even Mr. Carter, she set up the paddock according to her design. Bells hung from fence posts, wind chimes danced in the breeze, and small markers were placed near Shadow's favorite spots. Each sound had a purpose, creating a world where Shadow could move freely and confidently. When the final bell was tied, Lily stood back, brushing her hands on her overalls. "Okay, Shadow," she said, walking to his stall. "It's time to show you your new world." Shadow nickered softly at the sound of her voice, his ears swiveling toward her. Lily gently clipped a lead rope to his halter and led him out into the sunlight. For the first few steps, he was hesitant, his movements cautious. But as the bells began to jingle softly around him, something shifted. His ears perked up, his head lifted slightly, and he began to follow the sounds with a newfound confidence. Lily guided him to the center of the paddock, unhooked the lead rope, and stepped back. "You've got this," she whispered, her heart pounding in her chest. For a moment, Shadow stood still, his ears swiveling as he took in the sounds around him. Then, to everyone's amazement, he started to move. Slowly at first, his hooves crunching softly against the dirt, but with each step, his stride grew more assured. He followed the sound of the bells to the water trough, where he paused to drink. Then, as if testing the boundaries of his new world, he trotted toward the fence, his ears tuned to the soft jingling. Watching him move, head held high and tail swishing, brought tears to Lily's eyes. "That's my boy," she whispered, a smile spreading across her face. From the barn, Mr. Carter watched in stunned silence. "I've seen a lot of things in my time," he said, shaking his head, "but I've never seen anything like this." Lily turned to him, beaming. "He just needed a chance," she said. In the days that followed, Shadow continued to thrive. He navigated the paddock with ease, growing stronger and more confident with each passing day. His appetite returned, and so did the sparkle in his coat. Lily became the hero of the ranch. People from nearby farms came to see the blind horse, who had found a new lease on life, guided by the determination of an 8-year-old girl. Even Mr. Carter, who rarely showed his emotions, couldn't hide his pride when he told the story. One evening, as the sun set over the ranch, Lily sat on the fence watching Shadow graze peacefully. Beside her, her dad placed a hand on her shoulder. "You did something amazing, kiddo," he said softly. Lily smiled, her gaze never leaving Shadow. "He did something amazing too," she replied. Shadow raised his head, his ears twitching toward the sound of Lily's voice. It was as if he knew she was there, watching over him, just as he had once trusted her to guide him. Shadow's story isn't just about a blind horse, it's about resilience, love, and the unshakable bond between humans and animals. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to reflect. Who in your life could use a little encouragement, a little belief to get through their darkest days? Share this story with someone who needs to be reminded of the power of kindness. Leave a comment below and tell us, what part of Lily and Shadow's journey inspired you the most? And if you haven't already, hit the like button and subscribe to keep discovering heartwarming stories like this one. Let's spread the message that even the smallest acts of love and determination can change lives, for animals and humans alike.